We're starting with Decision 2024, and we have to talk about judges. Sounds dry, but the consequences of court decisions are very real. Proposition 137 on your November ballot asks Arizona voters to change the way judges are retained on the bench and the oversight that judges receive. Right now, Supreme Court justices and appeals and most superior court judges serve 4- or 6-year terms. Prop 137 would do away with fixed terms for justices and judges. The only end date is the retirement age of 70. Right now, all justices and judges come up for retention elections at the end of their terms. Prop 137 would limit retention elections to judges with poor ratings or legal problems. And finally, the Judicial Performance Review Commission rates judges' performance and shares that information with voters before retention elections. Prop 137 would add 2 lawmakers to the review panel. The lawmakers would have the power to call for investigations of judges for alleged malfeasance. And one more thing, if voters approve Prop 137, that would nullify all the votes in retention elections on this year's ballot. A lot to debate for my 2 guests. Corey Langhofer is an attorney with Statecraft. He helped draft Prop 137. And Andy Gordon is retired after a 45-year legal career. He's worked at the local, state, and federal levels. Janet Napolitano, former governor, was once your client as well. Welcome, and welcome back to Square Off.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Corey, I'll start with you. A question we often ask about legislation, since this came out of the legislature, referred by the Republican-controlled legislature. What problem is Prop 137 trying to fix?
The problem is that the judicial retention elections work very poorly right now. If you voted in one of the large counties before, Maricopa, Pima, or Pinal, you've seen judges on the ballot. In Maricopa, there's 30 Superior Court judges on the back of the ballot. Nobody knows who they are. They're not running against anybody. They don't have an R or a D next to their name. And so half the people don't vote at all. 60% vote yes on everyone, 40% votes no on everyone. That's just no way to run an election. If we winnow that list down to, say, 2 or 3 every cycle, you can learn who they are and make an intelligent decision.
No way to run an election. Andy?
What this is doing is taking away the voters' right to vote on judges, a right they've had since statehood. In 2022, for instance, 1.8 million people voted in the judicial retention election. Those people would no longer have that right. And the other thing it does is it highly politicizes the process. It puts 2 legislators in the review commission and then gives the legislators the right to demand an investigation by the review commission if that legislator disagrees with a judge. What it does is highly politicize what is now a non-political process.
But I think Corey touches a nerve there with many voters. I know judges pretty well. Even I look at the list and I struggle with that name, this name. You know what that's like. They're not in the public eye the way politicians are. So is that fair that we're voting on people who many people don't know?
Well, the point is, as I said, many voters do vote. 1.8 million last time. You're provided with the judicial performance review. If you don't want to vote, that's fine, because you don't think you know. But the solution is not to take away someone's right to vote. And that's what they're doing, a right they've had since statehood. You can either trust the legislator or trust the voters.
Two thoughts on that, Bram. 1.8 million people is less than half of the registered voters in the state. That proves my point. Most people blank this because they have no idea. And in the entire history of the state, there have been only 6 judges who weren't retained. So we're spending, if you're standing in a long line at the polls, it's probably because the person before you and everyone before him or her had 30 people to vote for and they didn't know what to do with it. 0.3% of people have not passed this test. The test isn't working. We need a real test for people who actually have problems.
Another kind of larger question, if folks look at the pamphlet, the information pamphlet they've now received on all the ballot propositions, it's unclear when I read Prop 137 who wants this. No lawmakers who voted for it have filed any information, little statements of support. Nobody has. The Arizona Judges Association was once involved. It appears it's not. Can't find its website anymore. Who wants this?
Well, apparently a majority of the legislature did. And polling shows it's, like sort of roughly in the competitive zone, so about half the state does. And I think that the people who are most stridently supportive have seen, they have seen the effects of judges worrying about their elections. And that spills over to the courtroom. You got a controversial case in front of you. Do you want your judge sort of thinking like, which one of these guys is more popular? That's cancerous. And the people who are worried about that like this measure.
What's cancerous is the notion that any legislator can call a judge in to be investigated because that legislator doesn't agree with a particular decision. The fact that most judges have been retained, I would argue, actually shows the system's working well. And that's why a number of former Supreme Court justices appointed by Republicans, let me point that out, appointed by Republicans, Ruth McGregor and John Palander, stridently oppose this. If you look at the publicity pamphlet, you've got 4 people all associated with the same right-wing group saying vote yes, and a dozen pages of people opposing this, and judges.
Well, so what about the 2 lawmakers, and could be Republican, could be Democratic, depending on which way the legislature goes, actually sitting on the Judicial Review Commission with the ability to launch an investigation for just about anything, it seems. If the goal here is judicial independence, which I think was the goal of this merit selection process, doesn't that make a judge less independent, knowing if they rule the wrong way on an elections case, perhaps, because we saw plenty of that, plenty of blowback, that they could suddenly come under investigation?
There will be 2 legislative appointees to the commission. There will be 36 members of the commission. So you've got 34 citizens, 2 legislative appointees, not necessarily legislators. That's not much. That's a voice, right? Someone to articulate the views of the speaker or the president or the majorities. That doesn't seem to be some sort of menace to independence to me.
I argue that's not just a voice, it's a blowhorn. Legislators have a platform that most other people don't have.
Well, and it's also this right to demand an investigation. Any legislator can demand an investigation.
Are there any separation of powers issues with having a legislator overseeing the judiciary in some fashion?
We litigated that, and every judge that looked at that issue said that it was not a separation of powers. Not so much that would keep it from becoming law if it passes.
You agree with that?
I haven't looked at it. It's an interesting common law question. You can come take my course at ASU.
Okay, will do. Yes, sign me up. There's also a retroactivity clause.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
Unbelievable. That, I think, is highly questionable.
Can I just tell viewers what that is? Okay, so the retroactivity clause means if this passes, all the votes on retention elections on the current ballot would be nullified.
That's right. It is probably the most cynical thing I've ever seen put in a proposition. I have been doing this for a long time. That means if the voters, a majority of the people who vote on retention, decide not to keep a judge or a justice on the court, that judge or justice is going to continue to serve anyway. I mean, this is an effort to give the judges who are currently on the court a lifetime appointment. And that wasn't the deal going in. It's never been the deal in Arizona. This is a model. And they're trying to throw it out to politicize the court.
And there are 2 justices, Supreme Court justices, Kate King and Clint Bollock, who are up for retention elections. There is a campaign to retain them funded by Republican donors. How does that play into this?
The retroactivity thing, I think, is completely overblown, the reaction to it. If the premise of the proposition is correct, these elections aren't working, why would you want them to be dysfunctional for one more cycle, right? If the voters adopt this, it makes sense to say, like, let's just stop this process as soon as possible, which is now.
Okay, last word, Andy?
Yeah, this is just an effort to politicize the court. We have a model system. It ain't broken. It doesn't need fixing.
Andy Gordon, Corey Langhofer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.